Before the NFL crowned its modern superstars, before highlight reels defined legacies or fantasy stats shaped reputations, there was a running back whose presence on a football field carried weight far beyond the scoreboard. Sam Bam Cunningham didn't just play the game, he helped change the game. And he did it at a time when America still wasn't sure if it wanted a black athlete to have that kind of power. In the late 1960s and early 70s, football was still feeling the tremors of civil rights movement. Some colleges in the Deep South refused to integrate. Some NFL front offices still viewed black players as role fillers, not franchise leaders. Into that world stepped Cunningham, a 6'3" force of nature from USC, whose running style was so explosive, so punishing, that even people determined not to respect him had no choice but to. Then came that night in 1970, one football game in Birmingham, Alabama, that would echo for decades. A game that made Sam Cunningham a symbol of change whether he wanted the title or not. But the story of how he got there and what he endured after reveals the pressures, barriers, and expectations placed on every black athlete who dared to be great in an unequal America. Long before Sam Cunningham became the man who rattled an entire region of the country with a single performance, he was simply a gifted kid from Santa Barbara trying to find his place in a world that rarely made room for young black athletes to dream big. Growing up on the West Coast gave him opportunities many black players in the South could only imagine, but racism had no borders. Even in California, Cunningham learned early that being exceptional wasn't optional, it was required. If a white player could make a mistake and be forgiven, Sam had to be flawless just to be considered equal. What separated him wasn't just size or speed, it was purpose. At Santa Barbara High School, he tore through defenses with a style that felt more like defiance than football. Coaches and recruiters used words like raw talent and natural ability, coded compliments that hinted at the stereotypes black athletes constantly battled. But Cunningham wasn't just an athlete with gifts, he was a student of the game. He broke down film, studied leverage, and learned how to run through defenders without taking unnecessary punishment. His toughness was physical, but his discipline was intellectual. When USC came calling, it wasn't just an opportunity, it was a transformation. He stepped into a program that was already challenging the old rules about who could lead and who could dominate. Surrounded by future stars like Lynn Swann, Cunningham found a culture where black athletes weren't just tolerated, they were central. But even there, the stakes were different for him. Every practice rep, every scrimmage carry, every moment was a test. He wasn't just playing for a starting spot, he was playing against expectations, stereotypes, and a football establishment still uncomfortable with the rise of powerful black talent. And soon, he'd face a moment that didn't just test him, it would place him at the center of a national reckoning. Because the next time Cunningham stepped onto a football field, the entire South would be watching, and many hoped to see him fail. By September 12, 1970, the tension surrounding race, sports, and identity in America weren't just headlines. They were woven into every cheer, every ticket sold, every snap of the football. And on that humid night in Birmingham, Alabama, the eyes of an entire region locked onto a single team, the fully integrated USC Trojans. For decades, college football in the Deep South had operated under a quiet, unspoken rule. Black athletes could play, but not here, not for them, and certainly not in starring roles. Alabama, the powerhouse helmed by Bear Bryant, still fielded an all-white roster. Many believed it would stay that way forever. Then, Sam Cunningham jogged onto the field. He didn't come with a political message, he didn't come to make a statement. He came to play football, but the South saw something else. To Alabama's fans, Cunningham represented the change they feared. To black fans across the country, he represented the future they prayed was finally arriving. And almost immediately, he seized the entire stadium by the throat. USC's offense unleashed Cunningham like a tidal wave. Play after play, he burst through tackles, dragging linebackers like dead weight. His 6'3", 215-pound frame didn't just hit defenders, it erased them. He scored twice, piled up 135 bruising yards, and left Alabama's defense gasping for answers. The crowd, which was all white due to segregation still being in place in 1970, 1,000 strong, fell silent. What they were witnessing wasn't just dominance, it was proof. Proof that mythology of racial superiority in Southern football had collapsed right there at Legion Field. Legend says one Alabama assistant muttered after the game, Sam Cunningham did more to integrate Alabama in 60 minutes than Martin Luther King did in 20 years. It became this line that followed him for the rest of his life, both a compliment and a burden he never asked to carry. But while the country celebrated that night as a turning point, Sam Cunningham walked away with the weight few understood. Because what came next wasn't fame, it was pressure. From a nation that wanted him to be a symbol, and a league that still wasn't ready to embrace what he represented. When Sam Cunningham entered the 1973 NFL Draft, the league was in a strange place. Black athletes were becoming undeniable forces on the field, yet many front offices still clung to outdated beliefs about who was smart enough, disciplined enough, or reliable enough to lead a franchise. Running backs could be black, that box had been reluctantly checked. But the idea of a black star who could define a franchise, that still made some executives uneasy. So when the New England Patriots selected Cunningham 11th overall, it wasn't just a high draft pick, it was a challenge to an old system. The Patriots weren't a powerhouse at the time, but they were one of the few organizations willing to bet on a black player as the foundational piece of their offense. Even then, the expectations placed on Cunningham were contradictory. He had to be humble but dominant, grateful but unstoppable. A team first guy who could save the franchise without demanding too much attention. Cunningham handled all of it the way he handled linebackers, head on with quiet force. From his first season, he showed a blend of power and agility that made defenders bounce off him like rubber. Coaches trusted him in short yardage, in the red zone, in moments where toughness mattered more than schemes. He didn't talk much, didn't celebrate loudly, didn't feed the narrative swirling around him. He just produced. Over time, he became the Patriots' all-time leading rusher, a record that stood for decades. But success didn't insulate him from the world he lived in. Off the field, Cunningham still felt the subtle and not so subtle reminders of what it meant to be a black athlete in a mostly white New England sports landscape. Fans adored him, but they didn't always understand him. Media praised him, but rarely gave him the same analytical respect white running backs received. Inside the league, he saw black players pushed into specific roles, denied leadership positions, and overlooked when it came to endorsements and national spotlight. Cunningham had broken through the walls of Southern segregation, yet in the NFL, he discovered a different kind of barrier. One made not of hate-filled signs or rigid policies, but of expectations, stereotypes, and ceilings no one admitted existed. And he was about to face a season that would expose just how much the league still doubted him, even as he carried an entire offense on his back. By 1978, Sam Cunningham was no longer just a rising star. He was the backbone of the New England Patriots offense. The team had grown around his bruising, relentless style. Defenders knew what was coming and still couldn't stop it. That season, the Patriots unleashed one of the most overwhelming rushing attacks the NFL had ever witnessed. They didn't just run the ball well, they ran it into the record books, setting a then NFL record with 3,165 rushing yards as a team. And at the center of that historic ground game was Cunningham. When the Patriots needed yards, they didn't run schemes, they ran Sam. His teammates talked about the way he punished defenders, how his legs never stopped churning, how his presence alone made safeties creep forward and coordinators panic. He earned a Pro Bowl selection, but more importantly, he earned the quiet fear of every defense he faced. Cunningham had become the kind of player you built a franchise around: consistent, punishing, dependable, and humble. But here's the truth old school Sundays has to tell. Even that wasn't enough. While white running backs from that era were marketed as geniuses, tacticians, or field generals, Cunningham was often reduced to clichés: workhorse, bruiser, big body, straight line runner. Analysts rarely discussed his vision, footwork, or football IQ, the very skills that made him great. He wasn't given the national endorsements, the magazine covers, or the spotlight that his production demanded. He'd carried a record-breaking offense, yet the narrative around him remained muted, controlled, limited. It was the same pattern black athletes had seen for decades: dominate the sport, elevate the team, rewrite the history books, and still watch others receive the glory. Cunningham had broken defenses, carried the Patriots, and proven beyond question that he was one of the premier backs of his era. But the league was preparing to do what it had done to so many black stars before him: redefine his legacy while he was still writing it. Because Sam Cunningham's greatest challenge wasn't the defenders in front of him, it was the NFL's power to decide how, or if, he would be remembered. As the years passed, Sam Cunningham's numbers kept growing. His reputation inside locker rooms kept rising, and his importance to New England football became undeniable. Players knew it, coaches knew it, opposing defenders definitely knew it. But the NFL's national machine, the networks, the award voters, the magazine editors, managed to keep Cunningham's star dimmer than it should have ever been. Part of the issue was his personality. Cunningham was quiet, humble, not interested in self promotion. And for a white superstar, that would have been spun as class or old school professionalism. But for a black athlete in the 1970s, especially one as foundational as Cunningham, that humility became a weapon used against him. If he didn't brag, they concluded he wasn't charismatic. If he didn't complain, they assumed he didn't command respect. If he didn't demand attention, they gave it all to someone else. By the time he retired, Sam Cunningham had become the Patriots' all-time leading rusher, a title that should have launched him into national conversations. Yet across the league, other running backs with similar or even lesser production received more accolades, more media coverage, more historical shine. The NFL allowed Cunningham to be essential, but not celebrated, valuable, but not iconic. He was placed into that familiar category reserved for many black stars from that era, respected locally, ignored nationally. And while New England embraced him, the country moved on without realizing what it had overlooked. His impact on the integration of Southern football, his role in reshaping the Patriots' identity, his place in the evolution of the modern running back, all of it was slowly fading from collective memory. But history has a funny way of resurfacing the truth. Because long after the cheers quieted and the stats became just numbers on a page, Sam Cunningham's influence didn't disappear. It only became clearer, especially when the next generation came along, including a younger brother who would rewrite the NFL in ways no one saw coming. For years, Sam Cunningham carried the weight of being a barrier breaker, a franchise cornerstone, and a symbol of progress in a league that insisted on slow change. But the world didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what he'd done until another Cunningham stepped into the spotlight: Sam's younger brother, Randall Cunningham. Randall became everything the NFL once swore a black quarterback could never be: dynamic, improvisational, explosive, creative, a superstar who rewrote the position in real time. He hurdled defenders, launched 70-yard bombs, and played with the style the league had no blueprint for. By the late 1980s and early 90s, he was one of the most electrifying players in all of football. Analysts praised him, kids mimicked him, and defenses lost sleep over him. But here's the part the history books rarely connect. Randall Cunningham's freedom to become the player existed partly because Sam Cunningham fought a quieter battle years earlier. Sam had already forced integrated football into America's consciousness. He had already shown that black athletes could dominate, carry teams, and redefine expectations. And even though Sam never demanded credit, the NFL's shift toward accepting and eventually celebrating black quarterbacks owed something to the ground he broke. His USC performance accelerated integration in the South. His NFL career proved a black player could be the heart of a franchise. His humility disarmed critics, even when the league failed to promote him properly. Randall may have been the lightning strike, but Sam was the weather front that made the storm possible. As Randall soared into MVP discussions and highlight reels, Sam's career started being viewed through a different lens. Fans and journalists began asking why his contributions weren't more celebrated, why his story wasn't told as prominently, why someone who influenced the sport at such a fundamental level had been pushed to the margins of NFL history. And that raised the final, uncomfortable question. If one brother became a national icon, why did the league let the other fade into the background? Because the truth is, Sam Cunningham's legacy wasn't forgotten by accident. It was the result of a system that controls which stories are elevated and which are quietly erased. And that brings us to the final chapter, where Sam Cunningham's impact is reclaimed, restored, and recognized for what it truly was. Sam Bam Cunningham was never the loudest man in the room. He didn't chase headlines, he didn't demand credit. and he never asked to be the face of a movement. But history doesn't always choose its heroes. Sometimes it creates them. And whether he intended to or not, Cunningham became one of the most important figures in the evolution of American football. He helped force the integration of the South with a single performance that shook an entire region awake. He carried the New England Patriots through some of their toughest, grittiest seasons and left as the franchise all-time leading rusher. He set a standard of toughness, humility, and excellence that players across generations still admire. And he proved that a black athlete could be the foundation, not just the accessory to a team's identity. His impact rippled far beyond the yard markers. It shaped recruiting, shifted stereotypes, and opened doors that legendary players, including his own brother Randall, eventually walked through. The NFL may not have always given Sam Cunningham the spotlight he earned, but time has revealed the truth. You can dim a man's fame, but you cannot erase his influence. Sam Cunningham changed football quietly, powerfully, permanently. If you enjoyed this deep dive into forgotten football history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Old School Sundays, and check out our jersey store below in the comments where the legends of the past live on. For $40 and 15-day guaranteed shipping, we'll see you next time with more football stories.